Hello friends, it's Kayla. This is my final wrap up of 2023. I have 30 books to talk to you about today. I didn't read them all in December, maybe like almost half and half I read in December, and then the other half I read in like months leading up till now that I left out of wrap-ups because vlogs weren't posted until this month. By design. Well, with the exception of one vlog, and we're going to talk about the books that I read for that one first, because the way that I've organized this was suggested by Sarah on Instagram, and they said, organize it by which books are closest to the direction you want to take your reading in 2024 and which ones are the furthest. As I love to ask you for recommendations of how to organize my wrap-ups, this one just sounded so fun because it's a good time to reflect as well. So we're gonna start with romance, and there's a reason you've never seen me talk about these 5 books. And this is the furthest from where I want to take my reading in 2024 because I think I've mostly moved on from contemporary romance. It was a very small moment of my life where I thought I was in my romance era, but I'm not. These books were chosen for a video called Reading Romance Until I Get a 5-Star. Since the vlog was never posted, you can ascertain that there wasn't a 5-star. So I just posted all the footage recently to my channel members as a bonus video if you want to join and check that out. But I will tell you like all of my thoughts right here. Obviously, we'll start with, what should we start with? My least favorite, which was unfortunately a members TBR jar submission. We have another members TBR jar submission later in the video. We'll get there, I promise, and you will come to learn the fate of the members TBR jar for 2024. But The Bromance Book Club by Lyssa K. Adams, I gave a 2.5 because I appreciate a lot that this had to say about men and misogyny and the need to like reflect on your actions within a relationship. And I think the men in this book, them joining a book club and reading these historical romance books was definitely valuable to them and was interesting enough to follow their journeys of unlearning things. But as you get little excerpts from the historical romance novel, it felt just extremely heavy-handed at the end of the day for what these men were intended to learn. And then the romance itself, we're following a recent implosion of a marriage. There are 2 characters, I can't even remember their names. This was a pretty forgettable one. And they have recently broken up and they have children, and that's not normally my favorite type of romance because it just adds such high stakes, especially when it is so fresh and we're really in it. But these 2 people obviously want to be together, but I saw absolutely no chemistry between them, no reason for me to want them to be together. I didn't like either of them. I didn't like them together. I didn't like the way that he went about getting her back, which instead of just communicating to her that he wanted to get to know her better and understand her, he like got all this advice from the guys where he ended up just like sneakily behind her back learning more about her so he could like slip little facts about her into their conversation, so it seems like he cared more than he actually did. I feel like we as the reader get to know her so much better than he gets to know her, but therefore it feels like as the reader that he is spending more time with her, but he's not. We are. It ended up being kind of a sad motherhood story, and then I wanted it to be more of a sports romance, and then it wasn't that. I think I wanted it to be funny, and I just didn't get the rom-com vibes I wanted until the end. A lot of it was just kind of a bummer to read. I just didn't like it, but I liked the messaging. On the flip side, a romance I did find funny was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. Unfortunately, this one got just worse and worse as the book went on, and I ended up giving it a 3. It's a hate to love dynamic. We're following these 2 characters who are each siblings of a couple who just got married, and those people can't take their honeymoon for various reasons, and now they have decided to go on it, and they have to like share a room and share a bed and pretend that they are the married couple on this trip. I overall liked the banter, but then the characters got less and less enjoyable to read, less and less interesting. I've forgotten who they are completely by this point. There was 0 steam, which was very annoying just because of what I thought it was building to. I don't need all of the morality storylines that this had. There obviously was this intent with character growth because our main character is very insecure about a lot of things. She is unsure of herself and she gains more confidence and decides what she actually cares about and finds a job that she really loves. But I often don't love following that type of character who is very like not self-aware, not self-assessing, and the way that we come to understand them, since we're in their head the entire time, turns out to not be exactly who they are truly, and being misled a little bit in a book to like get this great character growth moment is just not my favorite thing. We got a lot of character stereotyping. There was a lot of inconsistency. I find the ending and where it went didn't really fit with the rest of the story and felt like it was just thrown in for like a wacky over the top ending, which I wanted to appreciate, but it just felt so messy and thrown together and didn't make sense for the relationship that these two ended up building. I really do get why people like these two. They just weren't for me, but not a lot of romance is, so take my opinion, please, with a giant grain of salt. Next up, I read Devon and Chris Plan a Wedding by Tensia C. Higgins, and this was like leading up to a wedding, which is again like something that I thought that I loved and wanted to pick up more of, and thought if I was going to get a 5-star, this could be it. This is about a couple women who go on this reality TV show they have to like convince their parents, their families, that they are engaged. So it's like this, again, fake relationship, which is why I thought I'd love it. But the reality TV show part of it like made absolutely no sense to me, how they were going home and filming things, but filming things secretly, but their parents like were required to be a part of the show to prove that they thought that they were together. It was like, how well can you trick your parents? I can't turn my analytical brain off enough to read a book like this. I gave it a 3.5. I liked them together. The steam was the perfect amount. I just think the communication, while I appreciate it, was too much. They were constantly talking about talking and how they needed to talk and how it's so important to communicate, and I'm feeling like this and how are you feeling, and then all of the people on the periphery of their relationship talking to them about how they need to communicate and how communication is so important and how do they communicate this. Definitely nothing wrong with it, but not enough plot for me. There were so many conversations when I wanted them to be planning the wedding, which is what I thought I was getting out of this, all of these side quests and little challenges, and it wasn't fun, it was more sentimental. And then Partners in Crime by Alicia Ray, I gave this one a 3, and it's just turned out to not be the story that it looks like. This looks like they are going to commit crime. These two are glamorous and they're setting off on this adventure to like, I don't know, steal things and do all this crazy wacky stuff and get in these over-the-top scenarios. And they do get in these over-top scenarios, but it's not fun. This book is never fun. It's never glamorous. They are kidnapped. It's a second chance romance because these two were set up by a matchmaker in the past. It didn't work out. And then somebody dies and she comes into contact with him because he's doing the lawyer stuff in regards to the will and whatever. And they get whisked off on this adventure. She is a former like kind of con woman, and so she has all this insight into this crime boss situation and has all of these schemes to get them out of things. But it was just so heavy at the end of the day. They were in serious danger and peril, and they were discovering really difficult, scary things throughout the pages. It was much more of a drama than a romance. There was no romance to me. They didn't connect, they didn't fall in love. They were just experiencing this thing together and then also having sex. The steam was great. The writing was fine. It just was not a plot that I ended up being interested in at all. And then finally, People We Meet on Vacation, my final Emily Henry I had to read. This was my highest rated of all of the romance. Not quite a 5. I gave it a 4.25 to be aggressively specific. This is a friends to lovers romance. We have these two characters who are best friends. They have been going on vacations together every summer for like a decade. And we open the book knowing that something went down in a previous summer that made them stop spending time together. And the book kicks off with them starting up again and her inviting him, extending an olive branch on one more trip. I really loved the focus of friendship. When I read a friends to lovers, I find it hard to get on board with the romance for a plethora of reasons. The main two ways that books like this are typically written is they have like loved each other their entire lives but have never been willing to admit it to each other. They've just been pining over each other for so long, and then they just immediately get together when the book starts. And I don't love that journey because I feel like it removes a lot of the tension. And then the other way that it's often written is they have just been friends totally platonically their entire lives, and then suddenly at the exact same time they both look at each other differently. And I also think that that removes some tension. So in this one it's different because they feel like they have had feelings for each other on and off, but they both feel that their friendship is far more important, that they've never explored it before. And it's not even just that their friendship is important, but it's because this part of their lives is so sacred. They're not best friends who see each other every day, who live together. They only see each other on this occasion a lot of the time. And it's just this space that they hold for themselves and each other that's so important they're not willing to risk it. Following them on all of their vacations was really fun. I actually read this on Vancouver Island when they took a trip to Vancouver Island, so that was fun. The conflict was all reasonable. I just couldn't give it a full 5 because I wanted some more, I don't know, like a twist or a reveal or like a moment that really felt impactful. These characters to me are a little bit forgettable since, I mean, now I read this back in July. It wasn't a huge standout, but technically it is my favorite of Emily Henry's adult romance. The video that I read those all in will be linked down below if you care to see my live thoughts as I'm reading them. One other romance that I read this month was My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine, and I ended up giving this one a 3. It is about this woman who is struggling with like her art career and what she wants to do with her life, and she needs a place to live, and she answers to this ad where she could be a roommate to somebody for a very reasonable, like weirdly reasonable price. And so she immediately jumps on board and meets this man who is a vampire. He slowly, like throughout the story, lets her in on his vampire life and how he became a vampire. I think the vampirism is a little bit unique and it was fun to learn. And she teaches him about the modern world because he is from a very long time ago. He is like a charming character. I laughed out loud to the audiobook a couple times, which was a real win for me. He's pretty cold, but he's also charming because he's always like not understanding what other people are talking about and saying the wrong thing. I was liking it enough. The one steamy scene, I hated it so much. And then the book went in a direction that was so action-packed and ridiculous and like characters just in peril, but then they got out of it so quickly. And I think for me, the tone was just a little bit off. It felt like it wanted to be whimsical, but it also was very serious and sentimental for their relationship. And I just don't know if I liked the writing of it. So I gave it a 3. So that's my first section. What I won't be continuing a lot in 2024 is romance. I also won't be continuing a ton in historical books and YA. This is something I don't read a lot now anyway. Historical books that have to do with just like one event, especially an event that I've never heard of before. I read these both for the Goodreads Choice Awards video where I read a book from each category. The Wager by David Gran is a story of shipwreck, mutiny, and murder, where we're following a group of people who get stranded and they have to survive each other and the elements, and then they get on the ship and they arrive back and everybody's like, oh my gosh, you're amazing, you did all these things. But then the rest of the crew, who apparently they left behind, also shows up and have a very different story to tell. In We Deserve Monuments by Jess Hammonds, sorry, I gave this a 3, I gave this a 4. We're following a young girl I think in her senior year of high school, and her family is moving to a different city because their grandmother is sick and they want to spend time with her. And as she arrives, what's her name? Avery. When she arrives, she has to like make the decision that she wants to spend time with her grandmother and get to know her. And then she gets brought into this group of girls and makes friends right away and begins like a romantic relationship with one of them as well. And it's just about like leaving behind friendship, making new friendship, leaving behind your previous life and getting to explore yourself. She's very supportive of her friends, and she is queer and out, and she wants to make sure everybody has that same opportunity. Her connection with her parents is really challenged. I thought it was good, but I just don't read a lot of like YA. I put these two next because while I was interested in both of them, I just don't know that thriller suspense novellas is where I want to see my reading going. I really enjoy a horror novella, a surreal novella, but these just more being realistic intrigue me less. So that's just where I put them in the stack. This is The Christmas Guest by Peter Swanson. It's about this American girl, I give it 4 stars, who is at school and invited by her British classmate to her family home for the holidays. The first, it's like 2 chapters. The first chapter is just getting to know the girls and their relationship and them encountering like this weird guy on the family premise who might be following them. And then she's also learning about this murder that happened in this small town of a girl who kind of looks like her. And then the second chapter is coming to understand everything that we got introduced to in the first chapter and like why everything was happening and what's really going on behind the scenes. I thought it was interesting, a little bit unexpected of an ending. And then The Hole by Hye Young Pyun, I gave a 2.5, which was really disappointing because I like the idea of this so much. There is this, like, I like the idea of the hole. Like, you're following this woman who's digging a hole throughout the entire novel, and it's represented in the pages at the beginning of each chapter. Like, the hole gets bigger as you're reading the book, and that's just really fun and silly. But most of the book is told from the perspective of this man who's just lying in bed and paralyzed, had an accident, and the woman digging the hole is his mother-in-law. And you're just in his mind as he's struggling, as he's getting all of these doctors' recommendations of how he can heal and what he can do. He can't really communicate. So when things go wrong for him, he can't tell anybody. And when he feels like he might be in danger by his caretakers, he can't communicate that. So it's just his internal struggle for the book, and then coming to learn like what the whole is all about. The premise is so interesting. I never grasped onto anything that I was really desperately enjoying. So that's that on that. Next, I put 3 books that are sentimental fiction with a little bit of weirdness. I feel like I have read books of this nature many times. Even if I enjoy them, it's not something that I am seeking out. All of these were selected for various reasons that weren't just purely my own enjoyment, and like they weren't on my most anticipated list. They were just things that I grabbed. And even if I liked them, I feel like this isn't the direction that my reading is necessarily going, because I want things to be weirder and darker than these ended up being. So we've got Shark Heart, A Love Story by Emily Habeck, which is about this condition where people transform into animals. And it's just accepted, it's known, it's sad and horrific. And it's a big representation of grief. So we're following this woman, and her husband gets diagnosed and he becomes a shark. And he starts to lose everything throughout the pages. His job, his relationship, everything is changing. And it's just this interesting story from her perspective about grieving somebody who's not really dying or gone. It's just them existing differently. But then also the book switches from a different perspective that I didn't really care for. I didn't love the writing of this. I didn't just feel all the things that so many people seem to feel with this. I ended up giving it a 3. I think it's fine, just forgettable. Then I read A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki, which is a multiple timeline and perspective story. One is following a teenage girl in Japan. She just recently moved there with her family, and she's struggling to fit in with her classmates. She's struggling with recognizing her father's depression, her parents' relationship. And then we're also following this author, Ruth, in Canada, as she years later discovers a lunchbox with the notes and letters and journal entries from this girl in Japan, exploring, you know, what she's been through, and Ruth piecing together who this girl was. Is this family still around? Are they okay? The writing was beautiful. It had a lot to say about time. The main character's name is Now, and it's about like what that means, and never feeling like you're living in the moment and needing to appreciate what's around you. It went in a direction I wasn't quite expecting, which was a pleasant surprise. I gave it a 4. I quite enjoyed it. And then Terrace Story was the last book that I read. I was in the library, and I just wanted to pick up something short as my final read of the year to hit an even 270. And I found Terrace Story by Hilary Lichter. And this is a weird little book that I ended up giving, I just finished it. Is it a 4 or is it a 4.5? I liked it a lot. It is like 4 connected short stories. I also listened to the audiobook for a bit because I found out it was by X.E. Sands, who's one of my favorite narrators. Highly recommend. And throughout these stories, like, it kicks off meeting this little family, and they're in this apartment complex, and one of their neighbors has a terrace that they go to spend time on, and it's just like this most magical, beautiful place they've ever seen, but they can't access it unless that neighbor is there. And then we go to other storylines where we're following that woman growing up and learning about this like strange ability that she has to create space. I think it had a lot of really interesting things to say about loneliness and grief, but mostly attachments to people and places and time. It was vaguely surreal, beautifully written. Just, it's funny how it's not something that I feel like I go out of my way to pick up on purpose, is like beautiful, moving, sentimental, slightly outside of the realm of reality stories, but then I usually end up liking them. And then that brings me to the one historical fiction that I read this month. This I also read for the Goodreads video. I don't read a lot of historical fiction, but I'm putting it in the middle because I feel like when I do pick up historical fiction, I usually end up enjoying it. It's just not something that necessarily excites me. So this is a story of a woman named Rachel. She has been enslaved in Barbados, and at the start of the book, we're in the 1830s when the Emancipation Act happened, and how so many people were misled by that, and people formerly enslaved were now continue to be enslaved just under a different, name. And she decides to escape and run away and find her freedom. And the book is about discovering what freedom really means to her and to various people. And she is on this mission to connect with her children who have been stolen from her. I gave it a 4. I thought it was really lovely, especially for a debut. I'm excited to see what this author does in the future, because there could have been so many things added to this besides just being a linear story. Did I say the title? River Sing Me Home by Eleanor Shearer. Also in the middle is a memoir, because I read memoirs decently often, but it's not something that I reach for, multiple times a month. This is How to Say Babylon by Sophia Sinclair. I gave it a 5. It's one of the best written memoirs I've ever read, and it makes sense because in these pages you discover Sophia's upbringing and how she made a life for herself outside of her father's Rastafarian upbringing. And she did that with her writing and with her poetry. He very much, as she grows up and her siblings and her mother exist in Jamaica, sees control and anger as something he's entitled to as the head of his family. It's that perfect balance of learning about her life and the beautiful just sentence structure that she pulls off in here. And then also learning about the place that she grew up and this religion. There was a lot to learn. There was beautiful language to appreciate. It was just such a solid piece that matches my shirt. Next up is my chunk of mystery books. Obviously, I will continue to read and hopefully enjoy all of the mysteries that I pick up. It's something that I read. I read less and less mystery every year because I feel like there's not many that really surprise me and impress me. None of these got a 5, but we'll run through them. Death of a Bookseller by Alice Slater is more of a drama. It is just this dread-filled story of 2 co-workers. One of them has a horrific experience that happened to her, a family member who died via a serial killer. And one of them is obsessed with true crime, and that woman sees that woman grieving and has this terrible history with this situation as a kindred spirit, as somebody who should be in love with true crime and obsessed with it like she is. So it ends up being this kind of toxic relationship to follow. I don't know if you call it a relationship. It's stalkery. It's a story of obsession. You're not supposed to like these characters. You're not supposed to like the way they interact and everything that goes down in here, but I still just couldn't give it above a 2.75, let's say. I appreciate what the book was saying about true crime. I think it had so many interesting points to make and so many interpretations you get to have as the reader, but I just didn't have a good time reading it. I found it very repetitive, and while I wanted to enjoy the bookstore setting and did to a certain extent, and talking about recommending books and stocking the shelves, but I just didn't overall love the tone, and it wasn't quite what I was expecting from how the book was pitched to me. Next up, we've got The Overnight Guest by Heather Gudenkopf, which I gave a 3. You're following quite a few, 3 different storylines and perspectives in here, but you don't really know how they're connected or what's really going on. In one of them, it's just this vague idea of somebody in a difficult situation. In one of them, you're following a woman. The main focus is this farmhouse, and she's going there to write a novel. And she comes upon somebody in the snow and brings them in and has to find out who they are. And then in the final storyline that gets more and more part of it as the book goes on, it's a story from the past where there's this family who's brutally murdered, and then it's about who did it and how the police are going to solve it and all of the characters who are involved. I think you have to be interested equally in all the things that are going on, and I just wasn't, so that's why it was a 3. It didn't pull off anything impressive or twisty, but it was interesting enough to finish. I thought it was well written, and I would read from that author again. Next up is The Golden Spoon by Jessa Maxwell. This one is a light mystery, a fun mystery, where you're following a baking competition and everybody gets invited into this manor where they stay and where they film the show. And I think if I was more familiar with the comp, familiar at all with the comp of The Great British Bake Off, which I don't watch. I could enjoy it even more. I ended up giving this a 3. It's got a whole bunch of characters you're reading from the perspective of who are participating. And the main mystery, though it gets introduced in the synopsis in the first chapter, the death that occurs like doesn't happen until so late into the book and isn't really the main focus. The main focus is the actual competition itself, and if someone is sabotaging other bakers. So you're going week by week, who gets dropped from the competition, who's having relationships once the cameras turn off. It was interesting enough to get a 3, but there was really only one perspective that I feel like you were getting answers from, so I was just always itching to get back to hers. It is like an interesting premise to get to know everyone so well before the death, because then the second it happens, you already have your ideas of who could have done it and why they could have done it, rather than the death happening at the beginning and then, like a typical mystery, you meet all of the players and you get to decide who you think did it at that point. The Woman in the Library by Sulari Gentile is my favorite of the group. I gave it a 4.5, though like I feel like I could talk myself into a 5, because my one issue with this book, if I imagine it being written differently, I don't know that that would actually improve it. So perhaps the ambiguous ending is something that is important for the book, but you are following these 4 characters who are together in a library. They just met when they hear this scream, and then they find out a little bit later that a woman has died in the library. And there was just something about the dynamic between this group that felt very reminiscent of like The Secret History and If We Were Villains, and that feeling of this connectedness and this shared experience and this protection for each other, even though they just met. Unlike those other 2 books where they're this established group, it was interesting how warm they felt right away, and how I equally wanted to follow each of them and learn about them. So that story is actually the story within the story that our main character is writing. So that's not even like the novel, it's a novel within the novel. And you're also reading her as the author and the correspondence between her and the editor of her novel. And the editor of that novel is having their own theories about what happened to these 4 people and who the woman was murdered. And it's like you're getting to read someone's book review as you're reading a book, and that just made it so fun and engaging to me. But then the correspondence start to get a little more obsessive and unhinged. And then also the woman in the library, one of the women is an author, and she's writing a story within the story within the story. It was my perfect amount of chaos and mess and a little bit of pretentiousness, and I had a really good time with it. I was enamored from the very start. And then this one is a mystery novel, but it also has some time travel, time loop stuff in it. I gave it a 4. I really enjoyed it. It's called Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. And it's about this woman who sees her son kill somebody at the very beginning of the book, just in cold blood right in front of her face. And then she wakes up and she exists in the day before. And every day she wakes up, she is further and further back in time, and she's learning to piece together all of these things and why her son would have killed this person. But also it's just her opportunity to like get to know her child better and spend the time with him that maybe she didn't and took for granted all of these little things she never noticed in regular life. It was really interesting to follow, kept my attention the entire time. It didn't do too many things that were twisty and shocking, which I really wanted it to. Considering we're talking about time travel, it could have done so much. And I just think it also went outside of the typical time travel scenario because she was letting so many people in on it, which I wasn't expecting. I think a lot of times this situation ends up being a very isolated novel where the main character is dealing with things on their own and trying to figure out what happened to them and how to stop the time loop and everything. But in every moment she would wake up, she would encounter people and try to figure out like also if she was affecting the current timeline, if she changed anything or did anything, or if she was actually causing worse things to happen. But she would regularly invite other people into it and tell her husband and her son and other people that like, I'm in a time loop, I'm from the future, and I'm trying to figure stuff out, so help me out. She's a really charming main character. I loved the writing, and I will pick up more from this author. Moving swiftly along to where I see my reading continue is with the odd sci-fi or dystopian futuristic. I read Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenya this month, and The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. So, and the thing about this is not like, I have some low ratings here. This isn't about this specifically being where I want my reading to be because it was my favorite book of all time. It's that just like the genre overall is what I want to continue reading. I think that was clear. Anyway, I did give this 4.5 stars though. This is a commentary on the current, prison system, the terrible privatization and the way that so many people are benefiting from something that is often a continuation of slavery. It takes place in the future where prison is also becoming gamified and it's being televised, this competition. So people who are in prison have the opportunity to move up in these different ranks where they could potentially become free one day and get out of their sentencing. And we're following a lot of different perspectives. There's a main couple, the couple women and a main relationship that we're following, but there's also so many different things thrown in here that I wasn't expecting that I love, like people at home watching the show and their relationship and their conversation about who they want to win and who they want to die, because it is a deadly competition that they're watching. We're following producers, we're following other prisoners, and these two women at the forefront have very different perspectives on how to engage with other contestants, how to appeal to the audience at home, how to just act day to day. And I think because of its length, the perfect amount of time was spent with them and all of the competitions, but then we still got all of the other perspectives and things going on. It was just right up my alley. It had a lot of really great commentary, the perfect amount of heavy-handedness, I think, for a broad audience, and I liked it a lot. Then The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is my final members TBR jar pick of the year, and it is the one to decide if the members TBR jar continues for 2024, because the agreement that I have is that if the majority or half really of the reads go well, and by that a 4 or a 5 star comes of them, then I will continue the TBR jar for another year. These are just things that are suggested to me to read. I pick it out, I have to read it. This was a tough one because I've DNF'd it multiple times. I found it really hard to get into, but it has been relentlessly recommended to me. So I had high hopes because I also feel like I'm in my cozier era. Maybe that's why it got a 4 star. It got a 4 star because I don't think I could have appreciated this the same way in previous years of my reading life. And you were right, like this is very good. And it's interesting because we're following this character named Rosemary, and she gets on this ship, and there are she's a human, but there are various like creatures who exist on it, and there's like reptile people and just like other things, and there's a lot of conversation about culture and acceptance and gender and relationships, and following Rosemary get introduced to all of these ideas and become so accepting and just get welcomed into this like found family was great. I'm losing my voice. But also it's not just Rosemary's story, and I wasn't expecting that, because I think that's why it's had such a slow start for me over the years, is 400 pages just dedicated to this one woman and what she's going to experience didn't sound like the most intriguing when it is cozy, which means the stakes are low and action is low. But it turned out to not just be Rosemary's story. There were so many, like half of this book, Rosemary was not even in those scenes. We got to see relationships forming with multiple different partners on the ship, and AI, there was like sentient AI and a relationship there that was just out of this world. It was sad and beautiful and warm, but also it was more action-packed than I was expecting. I think when people pitched it as being a cozy sci-fi, I expected like not much to happen at all. Kind of Legends and Lattes vibes, where the action of these people's lives has already existed, and now they're just having this warm and cozy experience on this ship where their jobs aren't very serious. But they did end up having different adventures, and they had to accomplish things, and they were in danger multiple times, and sad things happened. I got to learn about a lot of technology. There was a lot of space jargon, but something about this writing was just so warm and inviting and detailed everything so easily. But yeah, I don't know that I'll continue in the series, but thank you for everybody pushing me to read that and pick it back up. You were correct. Next up, I've got a couple thrillers. I didn't give either of these very high ratings at all, but I do think that there is something for me with like romance thrillers to come. And I just need to find the right ones, because both of these gave me like something that made me think I need to step outside of my regular reading and pick up some more like relationship focused thrillers. But the ones that I see are like dark and difficult and like mob focused, and that's not what I want. But we've got Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead. I gave this a 3, and there, I get it that for a lot of people this relationship like ruined the book. I don't know, I can't explain it. I was eating it up. I think that I need to read romance thrillers where the romance is warm, and even though these people are like fucked up, you never question them as a couple, and they're always like warm towards each other, and the whole point is that they will protect each other from anything going on. It's never dark in regards to their relationship and their dynamic. So in here we're following, can I remember these people's names? Ruth and then Everett. So Ruth and Everett have been friends for so long, but they're very different people from very different sides of the tracks. And they did something. What's in the synopsis? Hold on. I did a whole live show about this. They have something dark in their past, but then the book opens up with somebody finding a dead body in a swamp, and the whole town is like, there's this creature monster man who's killing people, and Ruth and Everett want to prove that it's like not this creature. They want to help the town, but they also are very stunted by the town. There's all these secrets to uncover, but it really is focused on them and like their love for each other, even though they're not like technically in a relationship. Ruth is insufferable though. She's a believable character, but it was hard to read from her perspective, and everything that she and they were solving, that part of the plot was not interesting to me. It was not surprising, but there was something about it that did work for me to give it a 3. And then Killing Me by Michelle Gagnon, I gave a 2.75. It was a fast-paced thriller, and I wanted this like relationship between these two women to be the focus, and it wasn't necessarily, but it was interesting to follow them. So we have this one woman who is taken by a serial killer, and she survives because another woman who is just like a serial killer hunter shows up and takes him out. And now that main character, I think her name was Amber, becomes like obsessed with the other woman and is like, oh, you're my protector, like you saved me, let's do things together. That's not what the number one focus is though. It's more about her like trying to hide her dark past, because she doesn't want to go to the police because something has happened in her past that she's keeping a secret. She has a certain childhood that makes not for like my favorite main character, like I've established in other books, isn't for me. I would recommend these maybe to the same people though. If I found this funny, I think it could have worked. It definitely wanted to give Finley Donovan vibes, and if other people find this hilarious, which I mean they do based on the Goodreads reviews that I've seen, like that's great. The humor just didn't really land for me, and the storyline and all of this action just being about her encountering various people and bringing them in on her escape plan wasn't the most fun to follow. I have forgotten so much about this at this point, but there were things about it that I think I could take into my future reading for sure. The over-the-top wacky quality of it, definitely. Then let's talk about fantasy. I most definitely will be continuing in a fantasy direction as I typically do. This is something very reminiscent of many things that I've loved before. Starling House by Alex E. Harrow, even though I only gave it a 3. And then my journey into romantasy, I'm not gonna, you know, take it to an extreme level. I'm not going to commit to anything. I'm not suddenly going to be reading romantasy every month, but this really opened my eyes and also makes me realize like, this is not something I want to talk about. It makes me wildly uncomfortable that I read such a like smut heavy book, and I'm about to give it 4 stars and just like tell you how much I loved it. But listen, I'm going to read every book in this series and you can't stop me. So Starling House is about this girl who doesn't have very many opportunities, doesn't have a great living situation, and she is supporting her brother, and she wants her brother to have all the opportunities in the world, and she'll do anything for him. And there's this house in the town that they live where she feels like she's called to. There's an author who used to live there who wrote these books. Opal is kind of enamored by her and goes to the house, and there's a caretaker who lives there, and she convinces him to give her a job basically, and so she has more money and she has more opportunity, and she has something that she's just like actively pursuing that means something to her, and she gets just sucked into this like dark underbelly where she learns, you know, stuff about her family history and the house's history. It was the gothic fairy tale it promised itself to be. I only gave it a 3 because I just was never, I never felt like anything was particularly unique about it that I was loving. The writing is beautiful, but the plot itself, this was a 1,000-page book. Like, it's apparently only 295 pages, but it felt like it went on forever. I kept thinking it was going to wrap up. The pace was not well done to me. I think that the action was just like wrongly placed. I wanted to like the romance of it so much because they build this connection, but then the timing and pacing of that was just off. But there's something about her description and her just writing style that completely pulls me in, and I'm gonna try not to pick anything up from her again because I don't think she's the author for me, plotting speaking. And then Throne of the Fallen, Carrie Maniscalco, I wanted to get a 5 so badly. It was like so close, but I was confused for too much of it. Like, I needed to understand, and maybe I should have read the trilogy, the YA trilogy that came before this, to get a grasp on the world building better and understanding like why this game was so important. But we're following the Prince of Envy. He is a demon. He has all of these demon brothers who all represent the deadly sins, and hopefully they each get a book because I loved the writing of this, just the style of it. He, because of something to do with this evil fairy, has to protect his demon court by playing this game. And then we're following, was it Camilla? Our main character, Camilla. We're also in like Regency times, so the expectations on her as a woman is very much the focus, and she gets into these difficult situations, ends up like being blackmailed and in a scandal, and there's reasons why the two end up having to work together for some common goals. And I just like their dynamic was it for me. The banter, the back and forth. I don't care why they're instantly enamored by each other. I just love that they are, and he will kill anybody and do anything because he's just lusting over her. And they're kind of attracted to each other and together pretty early on, but it still felt like my perfect slow burn because there are reasons why they're not going to like really be together, yet he clearly is just like obsessed. Part of me feels like bumping this up to a 4.5 because I really can't stop thinking about this book. Steam levels, I don't read much like this, so I can't properly rate it, but somebody did ask on a TikTok I posted, and somebody else responded and gave it 3 chili peppers. I don't like spice levels as the reference, but 3 out of 5 apparently is where it's at. If I'm wrong, let me be wrong. The steamiest book I've ever been into. No cringing to be found, which really is a feat. Next up, I just put all of my horror stuff here because I obviously am always going to read horror the most, and that will continue into 2024. We've got Green Fuse Burning by Tiffany Morris, which is a very short novella. It's, what did it say? Swamp. I think it called itself Swamp Core or something. But we are following an Indigenous woman, and she is an artist, and you get to read and see some of her art, like descriptions of the art and then pieces of the art throughout here. She gets to go to this kind of cottage cabin in the middle of nowhere to continue her art, but she is in a difficult place in life where she is lacking inspiration, and the swamp, when she arrives, is communicating with her via her art, and she doesn't know if she's like hallucinating. Weird stuff is going on. I thought it was great. I give it a 4.5. Maybe if it was a little bit longer, a little bit like darker, riskier at the end, but I appreciate how it ended, and I think it's beautiful. It could have gotten a 5. It was close. I'm gonna read more from that author for sure. Ling Huan by Ai Jiang is like kind of haunted house surrealist horror, more surreal paranormal than horror. I don't think the scares were really there, but it was like my perfect amount, I give it a 4, of grief-centric horror. So we're following this family who wants to live in this certain neighborhood where all of the people and houses like are communicating with the dead, and people are desperate to get in on it to, you know, talk to people who have died in their lives. There's a lot of complicated relationships within this family, and I just thought it was kind of the perfect tone throughout. I don't know what would have made it a 5. I loved the writing, I loved the concept, maybe a little more plot. I don't know. And then there's Kill Creek by Scott Thomas, which I've had on my TBR for eons, and I ended up giving a 3. I understand people's love for this as like a great haunted house book, because for me, not a lot of haunted house books truly go there and are authentically haunted, and the people are truly in peril in the book. And this one did that. I just didn't really care about these people. I didn't care about much that went on in here, but I respect it to a certain extent. You're following 4 characters who are all authors. They all write like horror, but in very different kind of spaces, and they're all like stereotypes. And so when they come into this house, they get invited there under like weird circumstances. The way they interact is just interesting to watch. You get to know them really well, and then the house is doing something to them. When they all go home and they go to write their next novel, there's something, like a common thread between all of them that also pulls them back to the house. I don't have a ton of critiques or praise about this. It was just like fine, but I will obviously continue to read horror forever and ever. And then lastly, I put an anthology that I only gave a 2.5, but 2024 is my anthology year. If I'm looking at the reading that I'm going to do, how I see it continuing, anthologies are happening frequently because I have so many on my TBR and I have many that I want to explore. This one I wouldn't really recommend. I think there were 2 stories in here for me that were successful. The first one in here by Christopher Golden was a 5, and then the one by Josh Malerman, which isn't a surprise if you know my history with Josh Malerman, because I am a Josh Malerman fangirl. I feel like his books are so underappreciated. That one was also a 5. I like a lot of what this anthology wanted to do. The reason I picked it up is because it's representing so many different countries and cultures and ideas around the holiday season. And I think it did that well. It introduced all of these different experiences and added some horror into some fairy tale feeling stories, but most of them were a 2, just offered very little as far as a fully fleshed out short story. And it takes a lot of skill to perfectly pen something that's like 10 pages long. It has to accomplish so much in such a short period of time. And for me, most of these stories just felt like they had no purpose. They had no message. There was no great reveal. They just kind of ended, and not in a fun way that leaves you wondering like, ooh, what could happen in the future? That should have been a full-length novel. There was a couple 4s, there was a couple 3s, but mostly, even from authors that I've loved before, this just fell pretty flat. Those are the 30 things that I read in December and leading up to December. Let me know any of your thoughts. I'm sure a lot of these you might have different thoughts on. So if you want to share those, that's cool. But also, if you just want to tell me what you learned about, maybe a book you hadn't heard of before that you want to read, or maybe I dissuaded you for something. Whatever you want to chat with me about down below, I will be in the comments. I appreciate you a lot, and I will see you, is it tomorrow? Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow with my quarterly wrap up. So, see you then. Bye!